Can't hear you. You need to use the mic.
Yeah, just a few introductory remarks. Most of you who were here last night have already signed the attendance sheet, but if you haven't, it's going to be circulated around. Mick, could you?
Yeah.
And it'll go down both sides. And if you could put in your email address as well as your address, that would be very much appreciated. The school had the first session was last night. It was very successful. And this morning's session is to look at the Good Friday Agreement. And our thinking behind obviously the 25th anniversary, there was a lot of discussion about the Good Friday Agreement, they're for or against. And we thought that maybe the whole discussion about it by this time of the year would be exhausted. But in fact, what it did in the north was it started a bit more of a discussion which is ongoing. So we decided we would put our foot in the water and have a discussion here on the Good Friday Agreement. Most of the people who are involved in the Desmond Greaves Summer School, I suppose, cut their political teeth in the time of the civil rights movement, when one way or another they were involved either in solidarity in the UK for the campaign for civil rights in Northern Ireland, some were involved in the actual civil rights struggle in Northern Ireland, and others were in solidarity in the Republic. And there's a tendency in the media and what passes for intellectual circles to present the Good Friday Agreement politics and structures as some sort of natural culmination of the civil rights struggle. And in fact, the truth is completely different, because the civil rights campaigns of the 60s actually had by 69 culminated in the granting of most of the civil rights reforms, except that would needed to be worked through. Whereas the Good Friday Agreement structures are structures and politics that came out of the end of what's called the armed struggle, and all this sort of things in terms of increased sectarianism, increased repression, and all the rest that went there. So you cannot judge the Good Friday Agreement by the terms and values of the civil rights struggle. And I think that's important, because the civil rights struggle had a potential which I don't think the fervent supporter of the Good Friday Agreement could hold, that that structure is going to lead to some sort of increased political progress in the North. Now, don't get me wrong, it meant a decrease in violence, it has meant changes in structures, it has meant that unionism, traditional unionism, has been forced to look at itself more in the terms of as just one among others in the north, but in terms of the potential for progress, which would be around the use of the consent principle. Sectarianism in the north is at a level that it has never been before, and I include, when I make that statement, the way the state of sectarianism by 69 or the beginning of early 70s, far worse, although mercifully not in terms of the violence as it was through the Troubles. I'm going to wind up there because I feel very passionately about this on the thing, and just but I want to say a few words about our esteemed chair for this session, Catríona Crowe. She obviously is best known for her work with the National Archives, but she's also a researcher of excellence, and I had occasion to read an essay that she wrote there on the mother and baby homes in the 20th century. An absolutely fantastic essay. If you can get at your chance to look at it and to read it, it is harrowing, but it is brilliantly, and it shows a person of intellectual rigor, but also a person of the deepest humanity, and someone who really cares about humanity. She's involved in the Labour History Association. In fact, a couple of weeks she's been involved in their conference. She's been involved in the Women's History Association, and she has also been a presenter of art, at least 2 documentaries that I know on RTE. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to hand you over to Catríona, although we maybe started on a wee broad spot there about whether we were going to do presentations or not, but it's a great pleasure to hand over to Catríona.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for your extremely kind words. And well done on sneaking in as a third member of the panel with your very extensive remarks about the Good Friday Agreement to start us off. We're not going to be in any way influenced by that, I have to tell you, because you, of course, are the director of the school itself. Now, we have 2 very interesting people here this morning to discuss this very fascinating subject. Mairin Hurndall, I have discovered is the way to pronounce her name, which is of Norwegian extraction, is deeply steeped in East Belfast trade union, small U unionism culture. Both her father and her grandfather worked in the shipyards. Her father later went on to become a trade union official, and if you would tell through the microphone what his office was.
His last job before he retired was president of the Confederation of Shipbuilding and Engineering Unions.
Which is a hell of a thing, so there you go. She's very committed to the Irish language. She's actually a polyglot and speaks a whole bunch of languages, including Welsh and a bit of Cornish and Hindi and other more interesting, fascinating subjects. But her heart lies with the Celtic languages, and she's got very interesting ideas on bringing the Celtic nations, if we can call them that, together. She's a regular commentator on Tina G, where some of you will have heard her, and in Belfast on Radio Forge, which is a Belfast-based Irish language station, and as well as promoting the Irish language, her other passion is local history. We had a very interesting discussion before we started this morning. We could actually, both of us, have another session all together if we have time to do it, but we don't. There are so many things to talk about. On my left, we have Patrick Murphy, who came to political awareness through the struggle for civil rights in the North, which Kevin has so eloquently referred to. He's the author of We Shall Overcome, which was published by NICRA in 1978. He's been involved in all levels of education, ending as former director of the Belfast Institute of Further and Higher Education. Of course, education is one of the most difficult and fraught issues in Northern Ireland that still hasn't really been resolved. He writes regularly for the Irish News, and I just tapped into his latest column the other day, where he compares Northern Ireland to the Gambia, to Northern Ireland's disadvantage. It's a fascinating, really incisive analysis of what works in one country and doesn't work in another. And he's well worth following, as I was nearly tempted to subscribe to the Irish News, Patrick, just to follow your column, but I resisted the temptation because I don't have enough money to be subscribed to everything I want to. Okay, so here we are. 25 years have passed since the Good Friday Agreement, which seemed at the time to presage a bright new dawn for Northern Ireland, with what looked like the first successful effort at power sharing since the state was established in 1921. And while Kevin has been very eloquent on the matter of civil rights, it wasn't really about that, as he so rightly said. It was about getting people to work together who up to that had not, mainly because of the refusal of one of the major parties to all of this to work with anybody other than themselves. Now, of course, there were shadows in the background. The DUP refused to engage, what else is new, weapons as yet undecommissioned, serious mistrust between the parties. But the miracle of a supposed end to violence was so seductive that these ominous portents could be temporarily ignored. The agreement was international news as a solution to what had seemed an intractable problem, and all those who participated in the difficult negotiations were rightly praised for their efforts. I recently saw a play called The Agreement in the Lyric Theatre in Belfast, which packed out. Kevin was talking about the fact that the agreement has now led to a lot of discussion in the North about what was it, where did it lead to, what are we to conclude about it now. And it was extremely well done. It was lovely to see the Lyric, which is a really great theatre, packed to the gills with people absolutely passionate to find out. And the interesting thing, which is something I love about theatre these days, is it was all in the actual words of the people who were engaged at the time, so nothing was made up. Interestingly, afterwards, I was talking to some of the actors and Jimmy Fay, who's the director of the Lyric, who I know, and I said, this needs to come south. And it hadn't struck them. It was fascinating to me that an international agreement which garnered so much attention at the time as being a possible solution to a very difficult problem hadn't struck the actors and the directors themselves as something that would be interesting in the South. I also thought it should have gone to London, to be put on there. The arts are one way of educating people and enlightening them about sometimes quite difficult, complicated issues. Still hasn't come south. If it does, I recommend any of you who are living here in the south of Ireland to go and see it, because it's a remarkably good representation of what happened at the time. Now, back to my two esteemed panellists, and I'm going to ask both of them to bring us back to 1998 when the agreement happened, and tell us what it felt like to them at the time, what hope it brought them, or what despair it brought them. Did they think it was going to be a solution to the many problems that were there? Were they pleased? Were they relieved? I'm going to start with Patrick here, so I have to share my microphone with you, Pat. There we go.
That's okay. Thanks. I'll come out straight at the start and say I voted against the Good Friday Agreement. It dispelled me. I had lived through the civil rights movement.
Could people speak closer to the microphone?
Sorry,
I can't hear here.
I had lived through the civil rights movement, I had lived through the Troubles, I had worked in Belfast about the Troubles, and I found it a terrible anticlimax. What I expected to happen, having lived through a 30-year sectarian civil war, was that any agreement would try to build the middle ground, that any agreement, particularly from Sinn Féin, would aim towards the Protestant, Catholic and dissenter solution. What happened very simply was that Sinn Féin said, we represent the Catholics, and the DUP said, we represent the Protestants. And I found that absolutely appalling. I'll give you an example of why. Where I live in the country in South Down. My neighbours across the fields two orange men ran a small dairy farm, them and their sister. Every 12th of July, my job was to drive them to go to the bus to get to the orange demonstrations. And they went out for the day and they cursed the Pope and they came home drunk and they went back to their work the next day. But if we needed something, they helped us. And if they needed something, we helped them. When the Good Friday Agreement came, it said, the orange men will be looked after by Tony Blair and you'll be looked after by Bertie Ahern. I don't know if you can imagine two people who are much less suited to looking after anybody other than themselves. But suddenly, we weren't just neighbours, we weren't just even of different religion, we were of different nationality. And what happened was, of course, that they cursed the Pope. And at the same time, by the time the agreement had come, Catholics had begun to curse the Pope too, in view of the child abuse scandals. So maybe we had more in common than we thought. And what we found was that they said, Bertie Ahern will look after your interests, but my interests and their interests were the same. It was a slight division. They would like to have been like Union with Britain. I obviously would have preferred not to. But bar that, there was nothing between us. And that went through the entire society. And as a result, in dividing, I think it was basically simply largely on the two nations theory, that the Protestants were one nation and the Catholics were another nation. We had enshrined and institutionalised sectarianism built into everything we did. And today in Stormont, when an MLA goes in, he or she has to declare whether they're Protestant or Catholic effectively. That isn't quite a solution, a certain not a solution, I would want. And what that led to, that in itself was bad, that's fair enough, but what that led to was then a form of government where the elections bore no relationship to the policies of the government or the performance of that government. And what happened was we now have a complete collapse of the public sector in Northern Ireland. And what we have is a situation where the last local government elections there earlier this year, the main policy difference, or the main electoral issue, I suppose, was which party was going to be the biggest. That's what the election was fought on. And Sinn Féin turned out to be the biggest party. And that was regarded as a seismic shift. It didn't make the slightest bloody difference. It didn't make any difference at all. And I'll give you an example of one thing and then I can hand over. What Sinn Féin and the DUP have done is they have politicised everything and they have sectarianised everything. For 10 years I sat on the Southern Education and Library Board. It would be the local body responsible for primary and secondary education. And I chaired their finance committee and we had an annual budget of about £660 million. It worked out very well. We always came in about 1%, plus or minus 1% of the budget aim at the end of the year. John O'Dowd, Minister for Education, Sinn Féin Minister, said, no, the 5 education library boards weren't probably efficient enough. We will form one big board. And he formed one big board. And it consists entirely of political appointees. Members of political parties are appointed. I couldn't apply to be a member. And what happened at the end result is that they are now £400 million in debt, whereas we were perfectly on budget every year. And the same thing has happened in policing. The policing board has a majority of political or hand-picked appointees. And without wishing to be too controversial, I'll make the point that Simon Byrne was appointed because he was politically compliant. His record in England was appalling. Nobody would have appointed Simon Byrne as a chief constable anywhere. And what happens now is, of course, that Sinn Féin can effectively control policing. And far be it from me to cause any controversy here, but at a time when Tony Coughlin and Kevin McCurry and myself were marching for non-politicised policing, we were shouting SSRUC. If we had a march now, would it be SFPSNA? That's the demand we make now. And the importance of that is that when people tell us we're going to have United Ireland, you have no idea the effect that issue and other issues of a similar nature have on the unionist community. And as a result, we have deep, as Kevin made the point, deep sectarian divisions, the collapse of public services, and the promise that if we get the United Ireland, the public services will all be solved. That's the situation we're in. I voted against the Good Friday Agreement. I'm glad I did, but I would be absolutely a minority, probably of one. There's no other columnist in Ireland I know that argues against it. In the north, among nationalists, it is equivalent to the 1916 proclamation. That's where we are. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for not being controversial. That's a laudable objective. And what an interesting story about the Education Board. I must say I didn't know that. And I think the points you've made about it's something that bores people to tears a lot of the time is administration. And it's actually one of the most important subjects we can discuss, because so many fault lines show up in terms of how we administer our various states. Now I'm going to hand over to Maureen, and you have your microphone there, to tell us your memories, if you like, of what it was like at the time.
Well, I find it, first of all, very hard to disagree with anything that Patrick has said, but I don't think those problems stem from the agreement itself. I thought, on the whole, it's quite a good agreement because it attempted to keep everybody happy, to tell them, yes, your religion, your culture, and I agree that that's not just the way it is, black and white like that. It's going to be respected. There's going to have to be mutual buy-in to anything that happens, but I'd just like for a minute or two to digress and go back and say why we needed a Good Friday Agreement or a Sunningdale Agreement or an Irish Agreement. These problems go back. They don't go back to partition in 1921-22. They go back hundreds of years before that, because basically the people to whom I belong, the Protestant community who've been here for 100 years, always felt that they weren't welcome, despite the fact that it was in their radical tradition. They first of all contributed very greatly to republicanism, 1798. What happened after that? What thanks did they get? They were burnt to death in a barn in Wexford, Cork, other pogroms like that. Their numbers were reduced by the Native Temerary decree, and the border campaign in the 50s was an attempt at genocide. So when Carson, who was an agitator, said to them, home rule's Rome rule, they said, well, we're not having it. Because A, not only we're not welcome, we're going to be reduced in size, but nobody's appreciating us for who we are. We were the radicals who fought against slavery in Belfast. We were the people who revived the Irish language a lot of the time, and that's what I'm trying to do today. We were the people who fought for the poor in Belfast, such as Mary Ann McCracken, and yet I regard many people who call themselves Republicans with a capital R as people who basically do not see us as part of the same nation that originally was set up to be a nation for Protestant, Catholic and dissenter, to treat all the children of the nation equally. That hasn't happened. And of course, we never saw the revival of the Irish language either. But so where there is a minority-majority situation, you need special arrangements, and that's basically why the Good Friday Agreement was there. At last, they come to that conclusion. Now, I totally agree that it's sort of made a two-party state out of a one-party state. And of course, the people who believed in the two nations theory, the original people, the British and Irish Communist Organisation, funnily enough, and Sean O'Carney wrote plenty about that. But the reason that it's there is to protect minorities and to ensure that both minorities and majorities buy in to it. So in my opinion, when Kevin and others fought for civil rights, and I was amongst them at the beginning too, they were doing the right thing because the minority was being persecuted. That was at the time the Roman Catholic minority were being persecuted, although many Protestants who didn't own their own house had no vote either. But now we're in a situation where we're Protestant people are in majority in the north of Ireland, a minority in the north of Ireland. So we need the Good Friday Agreement more than ever, because I feel we need power sharing in any majority situation all over the world, wherever it is. And because I think without that, we would simply be walked over. As it is, we're not allowed to march. We're not welcome in O'Connell Street, for example. We're not allowed to even grow a rose at Stormont, for example, because of the Good Friday, some of the Good Friday institutional arrangements. But we need protection, so does the Roman Catholic population, so does anyone else, the ethnic minorities, the Irish language movement, and many others all need to be protected. So my belief is not only do we need the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, but we would need it in a 32-county Ireland whenever and if ever that comes about. And I don't know the future, I'm not a clairvoyant, but we need it. So it did a lot of good things. First of all, it put an end to violence. That's why we all supported it. Put an end to the most awful bloodshed imaginable. And secondly, it this is what Patrick is querying, it said you can have whatever identity you want. You can be either British, Irish, or you can be both. Now, yes, I believe I'm Irish, I believe I'm British Isles, I believe I'm Celtic, I believe all kinds of things, but I thought it was a good idea so that anybody can have a passport, that says I'm Irish or whatever it is. So I can live happily in this state. I can owe all my allegiance to the tricolour, or I can play Gaelic sport, I can play soccer, and everything's fine. So to that degree, that was okay for me, although it isn't for Patrick. Then we, of course, were told we would have lots of strategies, such as an industrial strategy, for example, especially along the border. And then we were told we would have cultural flags, symbols, and linguistic strategies. There was an Irish language and an Ulster Scots strategy, written out, but it was never implemented. And then we, of course, took our time to get rid of guns and to reform the police, but that happened in the end. But to me, what is wrong with the Good Friday Agreement is three things. First of all, it's never been implemented properly in these regards I've just mentioned. And secondly, it has been contravened, such as by the protocol, in my opinion, because we are now subject to the laws of Europe rather than to the laws of Westminster. Okay, you can take your pick. I don't really care for either, but and then you never had this Irish Language Act. It was because of all these things that at various points people walked out of Stormont. The UUP in 2002 walked out because the guns weren't decommissioned or the policing problems. The Sinn Féin walked out in 2017 because, well, first of all, they said it was about RHI, but I think mainly it was about there wasn't an Irish language strategy, there wasn't other bills of rights. And of course, there's never been a bill of rights, there's never been a conference, a forum that was to be there between Britain and Ireland. And then there was also a civic forum designed to be there, never happened. Nobody seems to care that these things didn't happen. Nobody seems to say, right, we've got to fix that. So there's no mechanism to fix what's wrong. But the basic thing in my mind wrong with it is the three strands do not include a fourth strand that I think should be there. They include the relations between people within the North, Protestant, Catholic, or the nationalists and unionists, whatever you want to call them. They include the Irish dimension that is North-South, although none of those institutions, of course, working. And then they include the British-Irish dimension. But the British-Irish dimension means Westminster and the Dáil, basically. There's no link between Britain and the North. And that's where some of these problems stem from. So that's my basic attitude to it, Catríona.
Thank you so much, and thanks to both of you for bringing such thought to the subject. Now, you're both on quite different levels here. Patrick doesn't like the agreement, voted against it when it first came out. He regards it as being that the implementation of it has been hijacked by two political parties who are effectively sectarianising it, and that administration has been deeply damaged by the fact that administration is now taken over by political appointees rather than by technocratic people like himself who are experts in the field of education and whatever it may be. Maureen thinks it's needed, but she objects to the fact that so many elements of it have never been implemented. Is there any common ground between the two of you on this? Patrick, I'm going to come back to you and say, what would you do if you were the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland or the King of Northern Ireland or whatever kind of fantastic position you might be in where you were all powerful? How would you fix it?
If I were the Secretary of State, I would resign.
No good.
No, I'm not serious.
I thought you already had.
Your question is, I understand the logic in it, but it's the wrong question. That doesn't mean I'm not going to answer it. Where the change has to come is not from the top down, the change has to come from the bottom up. That's where it comes from. And I'll make one or two points in relation to that. We've heard that maybe the idea of the two nations idea came from the British and Irish governments.
No, British and Irish communist organisation.
Oh, sorry, okay, that's right, sorry. But where the idea came from, in my view, and I've talked to other people, is I think it was John Hume's idea originally. Now, I know John Hume is above reproach across Ireland. You're not allowed to offer any criticism at all. I think that's where it came from. It was largely a Catholic Church analysis which led us to where we are, but we'll leave that aside for now. I'll give you an example of, and I'll go on to answer Catriona's question in a second. I'll give you an example of the level of sectarianism. My grandchildren, their mother is Presbyterian, daughter of an Orange man. They go to the integrated school where my granddaughter recently introduced Gaelic football. They were to go recently to play in a tournament for underage girls, under 11. And there's another school in our parish, a Catholic school. And the local GAA sent a minibus to collect the Catholic children to bring them to the tournament, but the integrated school children had to go in the teachers' cars, even though the children in the integrated school also play for the same club. So if you're thinking what life is like in the north, that's what it's like. And when you come back to education and the shortage of money that the Education Authority now has, my grandchildren go to a school, 120 people and 120 pupils at it. They have 20 computers, but they only can afford licenses for 2. There are 2 computers for 120 children. That's everyday life in the north. When the Good Friday Agreement was formed, we had no food banks. Somewhere around about 80 food banks now. We now have 500,000 people on hospital waiting lists. We have a population of 1.8 million, and 0.5 million are on hospital waiting lists. That's even more, or just about the same as your waiting list, even though you're 2.5 times the population. It'd be something like 14,000 people, 14 million people, if it were in Britain. So what will we do? I think what we've got to do is recognise that we can't do anything under the present system. And if I were king or the head of a republic or secretary of state or whatever, you've got to recognise that the system is now so entrenched. Who in politics in the north has got an interest in changing the system? Who wants a different system? Who wants a non-sectarian system? Sinn Féin and the DUP don't. Their electoral mandate is based largely on keeping the other person out. And although they have this overt competition between Protestants and Catholics or Republicans and Unionists or whatever, covertly they work together secretly. So when they won a majority, for example, in Armagh, Craigavon and Banbridge Council, what they did was, this was in the past month, they formed a committee, as a committee system, which excludes the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP. And they run it. And they run Belfast City Council. And I know that many people say that we have made progress in equality and so on, and that a minority has to be protected. The legislation won by the civil rights movement protects minorities. That's been there. We don't need political structures to protect minorities. And the point is too, when we come to the Irish language, and a cause which I would have had quite a lot of time for and a lot of support for, you now can tell the Catholic streets in the north, they're the ones with the Irish language signs. We've now got territoriality enshrined, or sectarianism enshrined in a form of territoriality. I'm not against place names in Irish, don't get me wrong, and I have a very passionate interest in local history too, but that's the reality of what we've got, which is very sad. And then when I was on the Southern Education Library Board, I'll give you one final example. At that time, local councillors were allowed to be members. And a local councillor from the DUP queried some sort of a grant, if I remember rightly, to an Irish language school in Dungannon. It was named after Tom Clark. And he queried it. And Sinn Féin councillor shouted across the table, "Irish is our language, you have your own language." And I thought of Pearse wishing for the day that the children of Sandy Row would curse the Pope in Irish. That's where we are.
Dream on, I say. This sort of leads us to, I mean, I'm not saying that what Patrick is offering us is a counsel of despair, although it slightly verges on it. I think he is a gentleman who may go to his grave saying a plague on all your houses, and there's no solution to this problem, which actually has been the curse of a lot of Irish people for a very long time. I think Mairin is in many ways more hopeful. There's one thing I want to say as a person who's been engaged with history for all of my working life about the sources of conflict. And this won't be popular, and Mairin mightn't like it, but if you want to go back to the sources of the conflict, you go back to 1609. It's that long ago, the land question. And this is one of the issues that we have failed dismally to come to terms with in Ireland, largely because the records of the Land Commission, which more or less solved some of the land problems we had, that have been there since the 17th century are not available to people. This is my bugbear and I'm not going to bore you with it. But the fact that the Ulster plantation was by far the most successful and complete of all of the plantations of Ireland in the 17th century is the source of a lot of the trouble. That is not acknowledged by the current Protestant population and should be. They need badly to look at their own history, including celebrating their radicalism, which I agree with you about. I'd be just as proud of Henry John McCracken and Mary Ann McCracken as one of my heroines. But the point is, dispossession always leads to trouble. And even if it is 300 years ago, it's still there lurking in the atmosphere. There's a fantastic project now that has digitized the various maps that we have from the 17th century in Ireland, where they tell you who owned what land in 1640 and who owned it in 1690. And if you look at that map, it changes from yellow to blue, so as not to give us any false notions, overwhelmingly in those years. So you're looking at a massive act of dispossession that happened a long, long time ago, but those things matter and will continue to matter until everybody faces up to the issues that they produced. Okay, here we are. Despair on the one hand, I would say rational optimism on the other hand. Maureen agrees that the Good Friday, or thinks the Good Friday Agreement is a good thing and wishes it to be implemented properly, and even goes so far as to say, should we have a united Ireland, which I'm going to come on to now, that these the issues that were embedded into the agreement would be necessary there. So, we've had a lot of talk about a united Ireland, we always do. Paddy pointed out, rightly, that the last election in the North is about which was the bigger party, and Sinn Féin are just about the biggest party now. Congratulations, lads and lassies, that's not what it's all about in the end of the day. So, a lot of talk about a united Ireland. I'm connected in with a project called the Arends Project, which is researching Northern Ireland, that's run out of the Royal Irish Academy and Notre Dame University. And for the first time, there was some decent polling done by this project, both in the North and the South, a year ago, which was widely publicised in the Irish Times. So what does the South of Ireland think about a united Ireland? It thinks it would be lovely, but they don't want to pay any money for it. We don't want to change our flags or change our anthem under, God forbid we should change our anthem, which is one of the most warlike, bloodthirsty anthems anywhere in Europe. And we don't want any unionists in the Dáil. Now, interestingly, Sinn Féin, who had been running, in my view, a very ill-advised campaign to have a referendum for United Ireland, which I believe they would have lost, have now shut up about it. And as a result, I think, of that poll, that they realise they're on a hiding to nothing with this. It would be very nice if everybody could just govern themselves instead of the egregious disgraces in administration that Paddy has so eloquently outlined for us in the North, and could prove that it's possible to get along with each other and do it. But there's one other issue that I want both of you to address here, and that is the binary nature of the Good Friday Agreement, and the fact that it definitely excludes anybody who isn't a part of that binary structure. The Alliance Party in the last election held 19% of the vote. The Green Party has not a huge vote, but it's there. People Before Profit have a vote. The SDLP have a vote. If you put them all together, you're approaching 30% of the vote. These people are completely excluded from having any hand, act or part in government, which means the two binary players can throw their toys out of the pram whenever they feel like it for whatever reason, and we have no government. Do either of you think that the agreement needs to be opened up again to allow for other parties to have some say in this? Maureen, I'll come to you on that.
Absolutely not. But just to go back to your point about the land, the first Scottish Presbyterians who came here were not part of the plantation. The ones who were in the Ards Peninsula, those who were part of it were forced to come here. They didn't want to. But I would argue that their presence in Ireland was a very good thing. I always wonder why there weren't more people who turned to Protestantism at the Reformation rather than engaging in the sale of indulgences. But I think that this country benefits from being a more pluralistic place, which it's not nearly pluralistic enough. So I think our coming here was not a bad thing, and everybody came from somewhere, Well, they might have Norman background, they might have a banking background, Huguenot, whatever. So I wouldn't want to just look on this, oh no, it all started when they came here. I don't agree, but we'll leave that and carry on. So, what was your question again, Katrina?
It's to ask if the agreement should be opened up to allow
No.
for other parties to participate in forming.
As I originally mentioned, I think the reason we have a Good Friday Agreement is because there are basically two sides in conflict. Now, I don't mean the DUP and Sinn Féin, I mean unionism in general and nationalism/republicanism in general. And where you have that, these are the people you need to, they need to be reconciled. Whereas people in the middle, be they people before Profit or the Green Party, the Alliance Party, they weren't involved in that conflict. They don't want to be involved in it now, but they are the ones who are saying, tear it up. The Alliance Party in particular, tear it up. Let's make sure the DUP can't walk out again, and Sinn Féin can't walk out again. They had every right to walk out. Because in the case of the DUP, the agreement was superseded by arrangements which put law of Brussels in charge of Northern Ireland. And that's not what the Constitution says. In the case of Sinn Féin, they had every right to walk out too, because the Irish Language Act and other acts weren't being, parts of the agreement were not being implemented. The trouble is, nobody ever does anything about it when that. Nobody ever tries to rectify these situations when that happened. When the UUP walked out, it was rectified. Until such times as the agreement is implemented in full and that nothing in it is contravened, I think you need that protection there. That protection is not for people in the middle who are moderate or who have some other view entirely. It's there for the two strands, if you want to call them Republican, Nationalist, Catholic, and then Unionism, Protestant, loyalists. I don't agree with those descriptions. Only some of them would apply to me, and even that varies. I used to call myself an avid Republican, by the way, but now I call myself a cultural nationalist and a temporary unionist, basically. So that's where I stand. And I'm a temporary unionist because, not because I believe in the union, but because I'm afraid of the way our people have been treated before and the way they've been treated now also. If you look at jobs at Queen's University, about 80% of the professors are from Roman Catholic national tradition, and the same with the students. So there's something wrong there. There's something wrong with the way a minority is being treated now. So I need that protection of that agreement. Of course it needs to be amended, and it needs, particularly the economic things, the industrial strategy, and I would say a manufacturing strategy needs to be developed, because I don't want it ending up like Dublin and Leinster, which is full of technological and financial companies that are run from America and Europe, which are destroying the soul of people and which are depopulating the rural areas of the other three provinces. I think that, and the Gael Tract, of course, being destroyed totally, that's all in subservience, in my opinion, to Brussels, and I know Katrina doesn't like it. But what we have here is, in the European Union, and that's what's responsible for the protocol being implemented, is that Ireland wants to go this way, wants to go the Anglo-American bureaucratic way, which is to favour big companies, to believe in world government, but which starts with them, and is to bring capitalism to the fore, but especially for France and Germany. And also it's imperialistic because it tries to destroy culture, nation, race, and I know people like the word race, by just mixing everybody up in one big organisation. Some people do believe in this room. I have no doubt in world government. I don't. I believe in the small man, the small nation, the small woman, the small child. I believe in cultural diversity, and I actually believe the solution to the identity problem here is to concentrate more on our Celtic neighbours rather than on England or on America or on Europe, to develop a common Celtic identity, which Padraig O'Snoddy wrote about in his pamphlet Hidden Ulster back in the 70s, where he said, you know, Gaelic is a language spoken in Ireland, Scotland and the Isle of Man, and the other Celtic languages are closely related. Those are the oldest languages of Europe and the most valuable. But since about 1971, of course, it's all Anglo. It's do away with the Irish language in the civil service. It's do away with the ability of the poor to rent a home, never mind buy a home. And I can assure you that's not what the Citizen Army fought for. I want to see another agreement issued where it is actually for the ordinary people of the North at first, and then for the rest of Ireland, that they have a right, that wealth should be redistributed. I don't like labels for any of these things, but that's what I believe in. I believe in the nation state, I believe in culture, I believe in full employment and a good health service, and yes, I know it's been destroyed. It's not just because of the DUP walkout, although I think they should go back. But we don't get anything from Britain, and I don't believe we would get anything from the South. And do the South want us? They say so, but if you listen to some people who were at the Arts Festival in Listowel recently, they'll say they didn't want any Northerners there. What are you doing here? This is our territory. So this is the mindset of partition that's to be heard. They don't even want Catholic Northerners. They just don't like Northerners at all. So all this needs to be addressed. I think one of those things, actually, to be fair to Fianna Fáil, Micheál Martin with his shared island strategy, is trying to put a lot of investment in, and that's the way to cultivate good relations with people up here, is to help them. And if they saw that the South were willing to pay money, which the British government is not, and I doubt if it will change under Keir Starmer government, which is what will happen, I think people would turn to each other here rather than to somewhere outside of themselves. And I'd just like to quote Eamon McCann. He said on a radio programme the other day, he said, "I don't believe in constitutional change. What's the point of it if nothing changes?" Well, I agree with that, but I do want the change, along with him. So I don't want people shouting about rubbing out a line on the border. That's all it is. It's just more of the same. It's more Anglicisation, it's more capitalism, it's more imperialism, it's more English language, it's persecuting the small person. And I think we need an agreement where things that are for the ordinary working person should be written into it and then implemented. How you do that, I'm not sure. You need parties who believe in it. I can't see any party that believes in it, to be perfectly honest. Even people before Prof say they were against the European Union, but when they saw it was losing votes, they shut up about that. Sinn Féin used to believe in provincial government, which I believe in. The provinces ruling themselves, now they don't. They used to be against the European Union, now they don't. They've all given in, they've all sold out. I'm looking for the person in the party that's willing to stand up for the real people of Ireland and the culture of Ireland.
Okay,
and
Maureen,
of the country.
you're very, very interesting to listen to, I have to say. But we need to be a little more democratic in our allocation of time here. You raised so many issues there that it's very hard to summarise them, so I'm not going to try. I think everyone heard what you had to say. The question I asked was, should the agreement be opened up to allow for other parties to participate in government? You don't want that to happen because you believe that there's no need for it. On the other hand, you want a whole bunch of other things to happen. There is a thing called democracy, which I know has a small d, where people vote for things, and if they're being denied power, having voted for a political party that they want to see in power, and that party has a substantial proportion of the vote of a particular place, to me, it is anti-democratic not to allow that party to participate in the formation of government, especially in the weird power-sharing atmosphere that we have in Northern Ireland. That's just my view. Now, I want Paddy to respond to this, as I'm sure he will have many things to say.
The first thing I'd like to say would be to congratulate the people of Listowel for not wanting any Northerners. They show remarkably good taste. Just before I look at opening up the agreement, just one thing, that my view has been sort of depressing and negative and so on. Two positive things in the North that I would just draw your attention to. One is the Irish News. The Irish News is a newspaper which allows absolutely every shade of opinion, even mine. And I've written for them for the best part of 20 years now. And in that time, my line has generally been different from their editorial line, very often openly against it. And in that time, they have never changed a single word, comma, full stop, nothing. What I send in, they print. And I find that very heartening. And that's not something you'd get here in Dublin. That's not something you'd find in the Irish Times, I can assure you that. And I do know from one fellow columnist who also writes for the Irish Times that you're told basically what to write. Your line is given to you. And
that is not true. That's misinformation.
Well,
sorry, Paddy.
Misinformation has come from a columnist in the Irish Times.
I know a lot of columnists in the Irish Times. Nobody ever tells them what to write.
Well, I have a different information on that. The second sort of bright spot in the North is one minister, Robin Swan, Unionist Health Minister, absolute gentleman, member of the Orange Order, committed Unionist, and a man who steered us through the COVID crisis very clearly. A man who was vilified by both major parties in what he was doing, but a man who stood up and who gives us a beacon of hope that there is an element in unionism which is worth supporting. The point about now opening up the agreement, I would argue there's not much point in opening it up. I think we have to start afresh. Now, I know that's most unlikely. I can give you an example of, say, like in people talking about the health service, and that perhaps we're underfunded. We are funded at a higher level per capita in the north in the health service than they are in the rest of Britain. Our health service is very, very badly managed. It's very poorly run. It's not just about finance is an issue, I accept that, but it's not. I'll give you an example. My local hospital is Daisy Hill Hospital in Newry. We recently marched in a protest march about them cutting back services. What they'll do now is, if you're ill, they will put you in an ambulance, not bring you to Newry, but bring you to Craigavon, to a very bad road. And people will die on that road in the ambulance, there's no doubt about that. There was a meeting in the Canal Court Hotel in Newry, where many people from various parties came along and said, we want to do something about this. Sinn Féin had an MP there, that was all. There was nobody else there from their party. A week later, Sinn Féin had a huge meeting in a Carrickdale Hotel, just a few miles south, about a United Ireland and the health service that would be there. That's the difference about the agreement. The agreement cannot be opened up in that context because Sinn Féin and nationalists generally argue that the solution to the health service or the poverty issues or the food banks, whatever, lies in a United Ireland. So there's a great dichotomy, therefore, between deciding what you want in terms of running the state or deciding whether you want to destroy the state. And that's the issue. And there is a general trend towards a United Ireland in that sense, that people say that's what we want. I would suggest that when it comes to the United Ireland and opening up the debate and so on, there's an element which most people have forgotten, and that's Brexit. What you're doing is not just asking unionists to join the United Ireland, you're asking unionists to rejoin the European Union. That brings an added dimension that many people haven't realised. And there is, of course, as you know, at the moment, a great debate between the two parties, Sinn Féin and the DUP, as to the legitimacy of Brexit and how it should operate and so on. And there are major problems with Brexit at the moment. And I've certainly been unable to order things from England on the internet because I live in the north. That's an issue. But the Brexit issue, I think, has been triggered largely from Dublin's reaction to Brexit rather than from Northern reaction to Brexit. And I do believe there was a solution to the border where an open border could have been achieved without any difficulty at all. But I do think it comes back largely to Leo Varadkar here and his attitude towards Brexit and his attitude towards Britain. And it has brought in an element of division in the north. And all it's done really has been to heighten sectarian tensions, whether it's education, whether it's policing, whether it's Brexit or whatever. That just adds to the division. And the division now is more firmly entrenched than ever. And oddly enough, when I was young, I used to think that unionists have got a majority and they're abusing it. And I thought that if the day ever comes, and I didn't think it would come, if the day ever comes that nationalism has a majority, they will show a greater charity, a greater understanding and a greater tolerance. I was wrong. It's payback time for nationalists. That's what they tell me. We're getting our own back now. We're in charge. You've had your day. This is our day. And that's the sad thing about the North. That's why I think the Good Friday Agreement can't be reopened. It has to be abolished and start again.
And they're voting for other things, they're not voting at all, or they're getting out and not coming back. And that is the sign of a truly failed state. And of course, some will argue the state was doomed to failure from the very beginning. That's a very respectable point of view. And some will say, why is it impossible for people in such a small piece of territory to try and work out some modus operandi? Is it sectarianism that's at the basis of this, or what is it? And we're not really any closer to answering that question, I think, this morning. I think we've had a reasonably good look at the Good Friday Agreement, both in a very dismissive way and in a possibly very optimistic way between our two panelists. And I want to thank them both for their great contributions this morning. Now you get a chance to row in. So is there a roving mic available?
There is, yep.
There is. So if anybody would like to have their tuppence halfpenny, if you're going to make a speech rather than ask a question, I would ask you to keep it as brief as possible, because we'll have a lot of people who want to contribute.